Cool. Hello, and welcome to tonight's meeting of the Hand-Eye Supply Curiosity Club. We're your hosts this evening. I'm Tobias, and this is Will. Together we have a number of curious and exciting topics to share with you.
As attendees of the Hand-Eye Supply Curiosity Club, you are all now members, provided you adhere to our philosophy.
Ex Curiositas Scientia.
We pledge to learn without prejudice in pursuit of our mutual goal, perpetual noviceship. We admit that it is impossible to know everything about anything, and thus we remain perpetually curious and perpetually novice.
This is our flag and our mascot, Franklin. The lightning bolt represents the receipt of knowledge, the enlightenment of illumination, the resonance of truths understood. It awakens and excites us and makes us hungry for more. And now, let's give a warm Curiosity Club welcome to Nora Wendl and Coleman Stevenson.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Thanks for coming.
This is really fun. Okay. Cool.
Hey.
I can't remember, do you say the...
Yeah. All right. Ready?
Mm-hmm.
This is Paper Houses.
Yes, a lot of that.
Oh, anytime, yeah,
Yeah,
please.
all the time.
Architecture is a fiction. If the word architecture is to serve a useful purpose, we must be able to distinguish architecture from building.
Every day we enter it, we dwell in it, we leave it. And if I'm not loud enough, will you just make, okay, thanks. What is it? And in what sense is architecture more than building? All architecture is fictive, that which is created by imaginative invention. But architecture is not just make-believe worlds, it is the making of worlds. When we build ourselves materially and symbolically.
We all live in other people's houses, fearing the spider electric. A house is a body, network of nerves, arteries, and bones. Winter's a vast and friendless realm in need of blankets and repair. I come with a wrench for taps, tap a tune of mending along pipes, snake through ducts and feather insulation between beams. Who am I making this nice for? I'm half charged, having curved too many smiles. Mercury retrogrades, in my mouth a tongue and nothing to say, though the air is cold enough to catch the words.
When I first started building, I built with my body. My materials were someone's unwanted living room curtains, which I found at Goodwill. I had spent 4 years of architectural education building other people's fictions. Pretend you're building a house. Pretend you're building a museum. Pretend you're building a library. Now we were invited to build our own fictions. What questions will you ask? My professor implored on the first day. What is the space between the shirt and the body? I asked. What is the space that the body occupies alone? This is the first thing that every architect builds. It begins with a room full of gauzy, diaphanous polyester curtains, a needle and thread. I sat in my bedroom for hours, winding the fabric around my feet, my legs, and torso, at every overlapping juncture, making a jagged black stitch that would hold the fabric together. I wound and wound the gauzy fabric until it became white and opaque, until I was covered up to my shoulders.
Reaching for a door handle, unfurling sheets, makes lightning, branches of blue shocks. Days go, I spark alone, the nearest neighbors 20 yards away and huddled behind black windows. In this town of trees and subterfuge, built on stumps, watch the hands around you they use, trapdoors, deadfall you in.
When you build your cocoon, you must remember to leave your arms out so that you can reach the scissors. I sat in my half cocoon with my arms liberated, and I tried to assess the space of my body, which was a space I knew only from the inside, a space I couldn't know as numeric, as scripted, as certain. With the scissors, I cut through the fabric, one long rip down the back, and I rolled and slid myself out.
What is the sky doing now? Is it black like those windows? Planets stew in galactic soup. Infinity ladles our universe. Cannot tell the difference between the hands that want to steal me and the ones that want to save me from myself. I coast the long hill, worry my brakes. A train hisses its approach in the cold metal of the tracks long before it rumbles past me. The moon does not rise, and no one lives there. It wears a blanket of cold rock all night. Because it is cold, something on earth is always in need of fixing. I don't want to live under the moon's sway anymore. I'm lost in endless rooms of my celestial house. I'm abuzz with what isn't, with the requirements of distance. Oh, put me on your shelf and take me back down.
So many houses have come before this house. You will never visit them, and they no longer exist. In fact, maybe they were never built. There are lines on paper. They live quiet lives in libraries. Start to analyze them. Start to filch parts of them, filling up your pockets. Leave the library with arms and pockets overflowing with scraps of paper you can use to build a house.
Somewhere in the midst of all this disillusion, a plan. In the blank moon, plant bulbs. Dormancy knows what to do when water and heat return. A sliver waxes, says grow. The soil's not hard, though fibrous with old roots from grass I pulled. Things writhe alive inside the tangle. I don't know what this thing is, but it moves with insect hunger. So I flick it off my index finger, expel it from the garden before it can eat what's mine. When I come inside, my hands are cold from digging.
These pieces will come together easily, their incongruent edges falling into place. Though these are parts of buildings built thousands of years apart, tree roots will tangle in the foundations, and there will be some inhabitants who could not dwell anywhere else. A woman who is weighted down by the pockets in which she stores everything she finds. A woman with sleeves that are much longer than her arms, who uses the room to dress herself, her garment a part of the wall. There will be a woman who lives in the house with her, a woman whose body is part of the building, whose head is a chamber for meditation, whose belly swells with light. These pieces will live on pages, in points of ink, in light. And this is how space begins, writes George Perec, with signs traced on the blank page I write, I inhabit, my sheet of paper.
Our world is alive and I need to tell you about it. I'm building a house inside my head. The sun breaks pale on a yawning day, then burns itself back up to black. I call it shelter. Knowing it has happened before is a roof over my head. Knowing it will happen again is the door I leave open for you. Architectural fictions, poetic structures, both theoretically inhabited. Through the words of poets, we dwell in paper houses. The paper, the page. Every great architect is necessarily a great poet. He must be a great original interpreter of his time, his day, his age.
Realize that the house you are designing has never existed. No building plan has ever existed prior to its drawing. It is imagined first, then built as though architects were fortune tellers. To design architecture is to write fiction because we're inventing space. Space is the stuff created when we put a series of walls together. Again, what is architecture? The floors, the walls, the ceilings, the parts that we do not inhabit, or the space that they create? What is poetry, the words themselves, or the space that they create?
One space can lead into another space, connected through memory, a haunted house maze, a stack of books, when really there is no place at all. With paper, we can try anything, make mistakes, try again. The only risk is an emotional perception of failure. Physical consequences are on hold while possibility is explored through the page. If the architect's marked page implies wood and steel and glass built on land through open space, then the poet's lines are breath in the air. Draw a secret house under fireworks. We arrive by counting steps from destiny to door. Imagery unlocks experience, recreates it, but it's almost meaningless without a room in which to cast shadows along the walls. Open the door of the poem, enter the room in which past, present, and future wait. We build each other, mythology and creation, our relation to place, to be fragments, holing, inside any house. I was projecting flattened you like paper, so I could better understand your land. The closer we become, the more I drift into the cosmos and see us down below like dolls moved through rooms. Considering occupation, I don't know, and I don't want to know, where functionality begins or ends.
What is the function of architecture? Is it the function of a poem? George Perec would sit in his apartment in Paris and try to design a useless room. Absolutely and intentionally useless. It wouldn't be a junk room, he would write. It wouldn't be an extra bedroom or a corridor or a cubbyhole or a corner. It would be a functionless space. It would serve for nothing, relate to nothing. A woman woke up one morning in her studio apartment and she decided to make a functionless space. As a renter, she inhabited the space of a contract with her landlord. The space of a contract is limiting, a space that mandates that one's body will seem never to exist in one's rented space, so that the rented space can be rented out, 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 out. She dreamt of scaffolding an interior dwelling, a room within the room that would be useless, a room within the contract within which there were no rules, no agreements, because that space could not be inhabited. To place such a room without rules within the rented room would be to blow air into the contractual agreement, so she signed another contract, went to rent scaffolding, and went to work building like an insect. Lifting and locking the systems of scaffolding together with clanging pins, stacking and pinning all the way to the ceiling. Once firmly locked out of this useless room, she started weaving a plastic net around the structure, building walls like a spider. And when they were done, she could only circumnavigate her apartment. She ran circles around the thing that she could not inhabit, realizing that in building a useless space, she had rendered all space in the apartment useless, and it was liberating to have ownership over a useless space, the newly useless apartment, and the miles of sky she could see from the third floor of a tall building, miles of sky she could see but not inhabit.
Stand under my window, feet in the flower bed. Once a night, I turn on my light for you. Where does my love fly off to without you there to catch it? The things that want to bite have simple names, so you may not see them coming. Should I be punished for bringing them into the house on my hair? I am placed in a room with you, always the same room, our infinite room, soundless and dark. Make this other dimension real. Slip your hands along the walls of the antechamber. There is to be no talking. Origins. We find out the heart only by dismantling what the heart knows.
Architecture and poetry share an origin, fire. I wasn't there, but the story told to me is this, that we lived like wild beasts in a crowded wood, and that one day a storm tossed the branches of a tree, causing them to rub together, sparking the world's first flame. These initially frightened us. We slowly came to realize that we were comforted by warmth. We tended to the fire, utterances from daily habits articulated into words, naming the things that we commonly used, language was born. This inventory was the first poem. Have I told you that architectural history is a fiction?
Burned it up, couldn't help myself. I knew I could never keep it safe. Ashes followed me around. I loved them like snow. Why is it never cold enough here for magic? Water just goes down the drain, soaks into the sidewalk and the ground, not like in Arctic climates, where water spurting from fire hoses freezes when it hits the air, hangs off street lamps, in cases, drapes, what's left of the burned out building. A Gothic ice cathedral, a glorious, unintentional reframing of a mess. History, objects. You are dead, and the dead are very patient.
I am standing alone in the dark space of a small woodshed, trying to piece together an architectural history. One by one, I project images onto the cheap scrim I have hung at the back of the shed. The scant light filtering under the door illuminates the floor. Dead leaves, husks of insects, dirt and sand, the ephemera that constitutes the history of the shed. The projector hums in the dark. Architectural history is page-bound, it is image-bound, and it is language-bound. It dwells in the same words we use when we order takeout, when we reprimand our dogs, when we whisper something we only want one person to hear. We cannot touch history, feel the weight of it against our palm, turn it over, and examine the layers of paint flaking off of it. This is because history is not the object and not the event, but the stories that we tell. History lies in the telling, so what if we were to let the objects speak? Would they speak our language?
The structures we personalize and inhabit, the objects we arrange around us, our very beings, form altars to permanence. The people who own the house now say it's haunted, say bowls, change counters in the kitchen at night. The dead are not patient, at least not the ones who live inside of me. Called by words, called by bells, an offering of oranges to suck the soul air from. What are you doing inside and out? On the corner singing as fog, into the night singing, into the dawn singing, singing in hallways when I open a window, swelling voices back into me to catch me up inside. I understand the sun and how it is not the darkness. You don't need an open window to come in. You teach me how to be a ghost while still walking in my life, coming and going as I please, eating everything I can get my pale hands around. Best practices. Every form is draped in an infinity of adherences. Shelter is shelter, yes, but don't spaces allow and steer the lives lived inside them? Bad buildings break our spirits. In her book, Poems for Architects, Jill Stoner claims that we have become disenfranchised of the spaces that are supposed to belong to us. They possess us with alarming authority and imprison us in symbolic forms that have lost their meaning. Poets know that form must be considered content, but even we are done in by best practices and assumptions of value. The page is not merely a delivery device, it is an inextricable part of the poem. I love poetry because there are no wrong answers. That said, form attaches to ideas, and we default to them, exhausting relationships, making arbitrary breaks for lines. Let go of dead ends, hollow forms, excavate the page, sift through layers, find silence in the center, an empty space. Apply the question of form to every page, every paper moment. Shape the room as needed for the lives lived inside. Make room for your ghosts. Hiding or confessing. Is there anything more dangerous than living for your own whims?
I choose to write architectural history with buckets and pieces of glass and other garbage. This is the closest I will ever come to dwelling in a glass house, projecting an image of one into a dark wooden shed. I've talked my way into this dark shed by promising to write an architectural history of a famous glass house, and now the words refuse to move forward on the page. At best, I am left with heavy sentences that feel as though I lifted them out of the mouths of dead men when all I wanted was light. I have been writing in the house, an architecture too proper for telling the truth. If you need to write the truth, go sit in a dark shed by yourself, I said. I poured a glass of wine and I went. A dark shed is a perfect theater for architectural history. In the shed, I viewed the images about which I've been trying to write. My plan had been to separate the language and the narrative of the history from its image, to liberate text and word, and to allow them to live their lives separately, meeting their individual destinies. Architectural history is a house on paper, a paper house. I am trapped somewhere between the fiction of buildings and their history and the reality of it, trying to commune across time with the long-deceased inhabitant and author of these photographs. Architectural history is more than a matter of perspective or of detail or material or architects. The history of architecture is written every day with our bodies.
The architect makes us spaces in which to exhibit our own lives or to keep them separate and safe. The poet is tasked with this as well. We all need others to help us tell our own histories. Our needs go on, and so does the pen across the paper. And when ordinary language fails, poetic scaffolding erects walls around you as you read. Stay here as long as you want. You are not renting. This room is yours, and it's always exactly the right temperature. So, anybody have any questions?
Yeah, we can talk.
Why a dark, why a dark woodjet?
I was at a residency that was in a house. Yeah, Avantika. Yeah, it's this great residency. It's called Coast Time. I don't know if, is anybody from Coast Time here? Does anybody know Coast Time? It's this residency out at the Oregon coast. You should look at the website if you're interested in residencies. It's great. It's coasttime.org and COASTTIME. And they give you a house for a month. It's amazing. So you just go to the coast. You're in a house. It seems insane. So you go to a coast for an entire month. You're in this, beautiful house. But I found the house hard to work in, and I couldn't. I just couldn't think. So I went and worked in this crazy garage that was next door to the house, and I felt a lot more comfortable just being in that space and thinking strange things about buildings, because a shed isn't a building. It's sort of a, like a bastard building. So I felt better being in there thinking weird thoughts about what buildings are than I did in the house. The house seemed to say, buildings are just things with doors and windows, and the shed seemed to suggest other ideas about spaces. And it's easier to write, I think, for me in the dark, a space where I'm not looking around or trying to project myself beyond, but just kind of focused. Yeah.
Well, and you don't have to be so polite. There's
Yeah.
something about a really nice house
Yeah.
that makes you feel like you have to control yourself
Yes.
so much.
I didn't have to control myself in the dark shed. I could go crazy anytime. It's great.
So I missed the beginning. I think I just walked in the introduction. So
Yeah.
is this part of how is this released? Like this what we just heard?
What?
Like this presentation.
Yeah.
How else is it released? Like is it like
How else is it released?
book?
Oh, that's a good question. Not unless you're a publisher. We can talk about that. No, it's not. That's a good question about genre and making. I've never made a collaborative book, but I think it would be a lot of fun. Some of the photographs are mine. Some of them are installations I did. Some of them are a series of photographs that I have exhibited around. So some of the work is, creative work that I wanted a chance to write about, and a lot of these exist in your. A lot of these are
same
things
as
that you read with poems.
True for
from
me
your work.
too. Just
Yeah.
pulling things together
Yeah.
that seem to speak to each other, because that, anytime
Yeah.
we collaborate, that's what we're doing, is saying, okay, what are we both working on right
Mhm.
now that could be better informed?
Yeah.
if it's allowed a space like this to communicate. So a lot of this exists in other separate places.
Did this particular project begin with language or with space? Or
Such a good question. What did it begin with? It began with the deadline.
Right. That's true.
Really the truth. But I don't know what the first marks. I think what happened was we were invited to do a talk about fiction and architecture, poetry and architecture, and we had invented the center. Should I tell her?
Yeah, sure.
We had invented the Center for Fictive Architecture, and we were invited to talk as the center's co-founders.
Which is a fake
It's
center.
a fake center. But we were like, oh yeah, we'd love to talk as the founders of the Center for Fictive Architecture. And then we had to decide what fictive architecture was, what that meant, and we didn't have time to make. We had, I think we aspired to like do projects that were just the centers, but we didn't. Like anything, we knew we didn't have time to do it, so we started looking at the projects that we were doing and how they echoed each other, and we just started cutting up our own work and splicing it together.
as a response,
Yeah.
it's very metaphysical.
Yeah.
So you're designing the Center for Fictive Architecture as fictive architecture?
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Yeah. As we go. Yeah.
You can have a web presence, or?
We had a Facebook page, but somebody took it down.
No, I don't think it.
It just
I think
isn't
it
there.
just decided that it existed as long as it needed to.
It's gone
And
now.
now it has particulated
It's
into
somewhere.
the ether. So maybe it'll happen again at
Yeah,
some
we should,
point.
but it would be nice to have another web presence. I think it's a great idea. Yeah.
What, if any, is the relationship of the Center for Fictive Architecture and the Center for Poetic Architecture?
Oh.
You got a rival.
Uh-oh.
I was wondering,
Oh. That's
do they
a
both exist?
wow.
I don't know.
You should answer as the
If
poet.
that other one exists, then who's with us to form the militia to go and dismantle this other organization tonight? Is how I feel about it.
What's the better website?
Yeah.
Pitchforks and fire.
Fire.
Yes,
Pitchforks and fire. Yeah. Yeah.
fire. Good.
So there were some pictures of one of the, I'm guessing, projects that you guys collaborated on there, went up on fire.
Yeah.
Is there a permanent, do you guys plan on like having a permanent like representation of the Center for Fictive Architecture ever?
Like a built permanent.
Yeah, is that ever something that you want to commit to? Or is that-
So you saying that brings up an anecdote, which was one of the funniest things I've ever heard about buildings. I was on a job interview, and I was giving a lecture, and this really, probably the oldest human being on earth was one of the emeritus faculty there, and he was sitting in the front row. So I was like in my 20s, and I just gave this really, animated talk about architecture, and then he said, and he was in Louisiana, and he just drawled, "What is architecture made of?" And I said, "What do you?" And he said, "What is architecture made of?" And I said, "I don't know." And he said, "It's made of money." And that was it. And I remember, I will never forget that moment. He just said, "It's made of money." And I was like, yeah, it is made of money. And so anytime somebody brings up building, I just immediately think of how expensive it is. And the unlikeliness of me ever engaging in that again because I have no money. But I think we could write a grant to build something, but I just don't think it would last very long.
The first thing I thought of when you asked that was, well, neither of us have cars, which means we have no
We need-
trunks in which to house the Center for Fictive
Yeah.
Architecture. So
It's got to be fictive.
It has
I
to
think
be.
it has to be fictive. That's the whole point.
It can only exist online.
It can only exist online. Yeah, it's nomadic. It's totally nomadic.
And that's also why I like the idea
Yeah.
of everything that we would ever produce under that name
Yeah.
would be this strange jamming together of whatever we are separately
Yeah.
working on, because that just
Yeah.
increases that component of a thing not really existing.
Yeah. Which I think, as somebody who teaches architecture, I mean, all day long, we're talking about things that will never be built as though they're definitely going to be built. And it's really funny to me. And one of my students is here, and he's like, yeah, it's really funny. But it's, I think for me, what's been really wonderful about working with somebody who's a poet primarily is that when you talk about architecture, people immediately leap to this idea that it's somehow going to be realized. And I think what architecture really is, in a lot of ways, is it's a lot of really tiny fictions that we put a lot of effort behind and and fabricate with our minds and pencils and images and words, but that we very rarely actually build or even build the way that we intend to build it. And I'm okay with that. For a long time, there's a lot of railing against that and a lot of, well, this isn't how it would work in the real world. And I think the reality is that architecture dwells mostly in fiction. And it has to, in order for it to ever be realized, it has to be fiction for a long time for people to get excited about it before it ever becomes realized. So for me, it's been really instructive and inspiring to play up the fictive aspects of it and remind myself that it's not all real. Oh, there are like 3 hands.
no, they all at the same time.
How about we'll start back and work our way forward. Tyler.
Can you talk about some architects working today whose designs you think are influenced by a consideration of poetics?
Yeah, I think Peter Zumthor. When I think of poetry, I think Peter Zumthor, because his work is really slow. It'll take him 7 or 8 years to do a building, and his clients just allow him that time. And so he's not designing on a deadline where he's simply shopping for things, and he's just sort of slowly coming to realizations. I think people like Jimenez Lai, who works primarily in comic book form before he ever builds anything, I think of him as a poetic architect. I think of those two. I think Lawrence's plans for the next hand-eye supply are very poetic and beautiful, and I'm excited. So I think and if you've never seen her unrealized work that she's done for years in glass, that's inspired by glass. I think you're one of my poetic influences. You're welcome.
No, that's true.
It's
It is. It is pure poetry.
It's total poetry.
Physical poetry.
Yeah.
It is so concerned with movement.
I'm really curious about the black and white drawings that you
Yeah.
presented in the earlier half of the presentation.
Yeah.
Where are those?
Those are inspired, or those are kind of described when I'm talking about stealing bits of houses and putting them together. So those were a project that I did right before graduate school where I didn't have an idea for a building. We had to design a building, and there was no way around it. So I went into the library, and I scanned a bunch of other buildings, and then I put those other buildings together to make a new building. Because I was really, it was amazing. And we had access to this incredible library. I was very lucky. The school, I went to Iowa State, which isn't, it's a good school, but it's not Harvard. So, but anyway, we had this great library, and I was able to scan a lot of these beautiful books that they had collected over hundreds and hundreds of years. It was fun. Yeah. So it's, I think the drawings represent 100 years of architectural technology. That was another thing I wanted to do, is bring together 100 years worth of technologies into one building. Yeah, it was fun. It's still my favorite project.
Yeah,
It's really old, but I still love it.
Plan too?
Yeah, I think I've got some plans. Do you have the? Oh, I can do it.
You can do that with you.
Yeah, these are some of the plans. Just your typical house. So this is what would have happened if I gone into practice. It's a really good thing there that we pay teachers, because I would have been crazy. But everything, so none of these were things I drew by hand. They were all stolen. And then the things that looked like fabric were work garments that I'd made and then scanned and put them into the drawings.
Just feel like it wants to grab me or eat
Yeah,
me.
it does. It wants to eat you. It's a carnivorous architecture.
Just to
Yeah.
piggyback on that, and since
Yeah.
you're at hand-eye,
Yeah.
how much, and you know about slowness, how
Yeah.
much do you relish or think about the importance of the hand in architecture, drawing
yeah.
and renderings today, whether it's in the process or
Yeah.
the blueprint of it? And what's your relationship? Both.
It's such a hard thing to talk about because, I mean, these were, I think one reason I love this project is that it was slow and laborious and about finding pieces and piecing the pieces together, and it took a year, and to do like 12 drawings, and that was unbelievable. Having the time to think that much and carefully put things together. And I think what's a little bit sad is that I don't have that time anymore, or I don't give myself that time anymore. I do things more quickly now, or build things and then destroy them in installations. But I think it's almost necessary at some point to take on some huge project where it's just you and your hand, and it takes as long as it takes, and you have the space to do that. It was really instructive for me. I learned a lot about, I don't know what I learned about. Working slowly. Yeah. How do you write by
I feel
hand?
jealous of everything you just said. It's just not something that we get to
Yeah.
do unless we are
Yeah.
choosing to combine with
Yeah.
other fields, you know.
Do you write by hand ever?
Always at first.
Yeah.
So it's as far as process goes. I enjoy that direct contact too.
Yeah. She has an amazing process though, where what I love about your what I'm jealous of is that you always have a binder full of poems that you're working on, and they travel with you, and they're like an extension of her. And so you're talking, and she pulls out a poem that she's currently working on, and it's really wonderful to work with somebody who's always carrying their work with them.
Hope I don't get mugged.
Yeah, don't.
Do you guys have projects that once they're realized, they become better than what you imagine them? Because I usually feel like it's the other way around, where it's like you imagine all this stuff, and then reality hits, and you have to make compromises. Are you ever surprised? Do you go, are there other people or your own work where you're like, this turned out so much better than it was the original concept?
Anything coming to mind for you?
Yeah, I feel. Do you want to go first?
No.
Okay, I feel like I'm I must not be a designer really, because I think that a real designer has a vision and then they work toward that vision, and I've never been like that as a maker of things. I can't think about a goal and then work my way there because I get too interested in the process as I'm working, whether it's writing or collaging or drawing or whatever. I don't really care. I might start with an inspiration, but I don't really ultimately care what it turns into. And I think, I think the process is way more interesting for me. So I don't know. I wish I always knew what I was going to make before I did it, but I can't measure it against the process.
I think it's actually kind of good, and so I guess I'm not a designer in that also, in that I don't know the goal specifically when I start either, but I do know that feeling of it ending up being so much more of a whole thing, because I always start with scraps. Things that don't belong together being forced together. It's sort of just playing around and seeing what gels and starts to talk to each other, right?
Yeah.
And so in that, getting to watch it develop in a way that feels almost out of my control sometimes is really exciting, because then all of a sudden, oh, look at that, poems. Where did those come from? It's great. And especially because I'm absolutely against writing about a particular thing. If I can find it along the way, that's nicer.
Yeah, agree. Yeah.
Because first of all, I love the talk. I thought this was super awesome.
Thank you.
And then secondly, this is more of a statement, I guess, than a question. But so I'm an intellectual property attorney. I thought it was really interesting that
He's going to get me for my
things
drawings.
that you were talking about actually are policy issues that we deal with too, between
What do you mean?
form and function, utilitarian versus what it actually makes you feel, creativity, like what is the protected aspects. I wasn't anticipating this to be that kind of talk, but these are the exact same things that we talk about right now, like changing current laws.
Really?
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Wait, can you explain like one little part of that? So
with a lot of
that's
specific
crazy.
product design,
Yeah.
the question goes between utilitarian
Oh,
aspects
yeah.
which are not protectable, and
Oh.
the creative parts that are protectable.
Oh,
And
that's
so how do you
interesting.
differentiate between like form, function,
Oh, that's interesting.
Especially in the fashion world, this
Oh,
is such a huge issue. I teach at the Art Institute, so we have a fashion
yeah, right,
design
yeah.
program, and so this comes up in a lot of the design studies classes, and yeah, it's just such a debate. Nobody sees eye to eye on how that should be.
well, it's these ethereal concepts too,
Yeah.
that in talking about them makes sense, but then in practice, it's how do you actually pull these
Wow.
things apart?
That's really interesting.
And then I guess our American view about not wanting to protect this. Or
Yeah.
European style,
Yeah.
all about protecting all these different creative aspects to it.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, and with the argument that many people make that any participation is good, right? So it's exposure, it's, you know, even if someone is copying your design and distributing it, that it's reaching an audience that wouldn't be your audience anyway, because they wouldn't have the resources to purchase at that higher level of design. So I don't have a strong feeling one way or the other, because I can see, depending on where you're standing inside of that industry, all aspects of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's interesting. Wow. Yeah.
Future collaborations planned?
Yeah, of course. Well,
What are some of the ideas being
oh,
discussed?
Between us?
Yes.
Good question. That nothing particular at the moment. Do you have any suggestions for what you'll task us with exploring next?
Yeah. Why not? Yeah.
What would you like to see?
Yeah, what do you think?
Well, I was wondering, of course, your
Huh.
comment about that Meredith Stackland number saying.
Oh, it's made of money. Yeah, he was awesome.
If money was no object.
Oh,
Mm.
God.
If you had all the resources.
I know what
We
we
would
would
all
do.
go somewhere together.
After we take out, what was the name of this other institution
we'll-
here?
We'll send a lawyer after the Center for Poetic Architecture.
I don't know why we didn't call it that. We were trying to be
Expansive.
Yeah. What I would really
Yeah.
love is to give her some poems and make her build them.
Oh, I'd love that. Yeah, that'd be fun.
That's what I would like
That'd
to
be really fun.
and document the whole
Yeah.
process.
Building
Ask her
homes.
a lot of questions. Why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? And see what we come up with at the end. But make her actually, well, maybe
Build
not
a
actually
home.
physically build it, but design, completely design.
No, I would like
whatever
to build
the
them
structure would be.
in my apartment.
Oh, so you see them as small, my poems.
I see them as inhabitable. No, I at the beach.
I also quite enjoyed the cadence and his
Oh.
speech. It's very beautiful and delicate, and I think a little, not theatrical, but just
Yeah.
like a larger space and a bigger projection, and if you
Yeah.
had interest, you just,
Yeah,
it would- and I just even that as a
yeah,
recording that, and someone was asking how the
Oh.
presentation would be archived. So
yeah.
even if it's just, audio.
That's a great idea.
Stereo,
Yeah.
Speakers is stereo. Yeah,
Yeah.
your voice, her voice.
I think it would be,
Put it on the internet.
that would be great. I would love to
apply
have,
for a grant to do that.
we should. It would be great to have a huge cavernous space with nothing else in it where we could just talk and project
In a
huge
natural space,
images.
in a cave.
In a cave, yeah.
When we were
Yes.
first coming up with
We did a
this,
cave.
so that might answer the question better of how did this get started
Yeah.
with the physical or with the words or whatever you asked. Anyway, it was the space we were given. We did another version of this.
It was a cave, actually.
And it was a little bit like you're describing. It was this strange long room, and the screen was probably as big as these two panels together. And we stood each with a microphone on either side of the
Yeah.
screen.
Yeah.
So it had that kind of drama that I think you're looking for, maybe not enough. But point is, when we were first talking about what we would do for the presentation, we thought about that setup
Yeah.
and thought about doing it as like a faux debate, like
Yeah.
a fight.
Yeah.
a disagreement. And then we realized that we didn't disagree on anything, and that there was no
Yeah.
point in pretending.
Neither one of us was going to play the devil's advocate, so it didn't.
But it still works in that we do deliver differently.
Yeah.
So it has something of that same dynamic.
I like the idea of doing it a scale bigger.
Yeah.
That would be really fun.
I volunteer to be the antagonist or the
Yeah,
other side of the
yeah.
debate. Yeah, you two guys are on the same side.
Yeah.
Oh, no, you can't argue. That's not
I know.
possible to argue.
I know.
You can volley in return, but you don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want to be the third voice?
That would be interesting. I would do that.
I'll be the guy on the other side.
Nice. You're in. Do you think that there should be arguing? Do you think there should be arguing? Or an advocate
it's
for another
inevitable.
perspective?
It's absolutely inevitable.
That's a good point.
That goes along with the building industry.
Yeah, yes. Yeah, yeah. You play the person who says it can't be done. No, you can't build it this way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll talk about it.
Next time we do this, we'll have David. We'll have a third voice.
Do you
Love it.
both teach or just you?
Both teach.
You both teach?
Yeah.
So, are you guys, do you share your work with your students at all?
You know, sometimes
Are you
it's.
influenced by your students' work?
Oh yeah. It's a tricky line, I think, especially for me because I teach students of architecture, and so I think I often am even nervous to tell them I have a reading because I think that they might think like, oh, she doesn't take architecture seriously, or you know, whatever. I just feel like when you're teaching in a discipline, a very specific discipline, like I encourage a lot of going beyond the discipline and taking from performance art and borrowing from artists and all of that stuff in the studio setting. I'm not sure. I don't know how my students would feel about this work. It's a really good question. I do feel like I'm leading a sort of double life where I don't really let them know when I'm having a reading or doing something because I'm just afraid that I don't know what I'm afraid of. I guess I like compartmentalizing things. One of my students is here. I don't know. Brendan, are you damaged by this? But Brendan's really creative, so.
No,
No.
it's great.
Okay.
I always invite my students to come to readings and things. One of my former students is here. Are you damaged by this? I'll ask you that since she asked that, even though I'm not concerned about that. But
Yeah, she doesn't care if she damages it.
oh no, you don't say that. But what we have done
Yeah.
is guest present in
Yes,
each other's
yes,
classes.
yes.
That has been
It's been great.
really great.
It's been great. Yeah, so that's true. That's
I
been a lot of
I don't
fun.
show them my work. Like I would never be one of those professors who assigns their
So you
own
guys
book.
would never let your students critique you?
I don't know if it's even so much that. I mean, that would actually be great. I wouldn't mind that. I think the part you get worried about as a teacher is you don't want them feeling like, oh, that's what she likes, and so I'm
Yeah.
going to replicate that because that will make her happy. I don't know. What you're a teacher too.
You think you should show your work if it's beautiful, let them
Yeah.
embrace it.
Yeah.
I mean,
True.
if you just show boring architecture, you'll create
Yeah.
boring architects.
It's true.
If your work is so forward thinking, which
Yeah.
it is, just, show
Yeah.
it. And Eric and Neil was saying
So
that
it's
as your
important to know
colleagues.
where the
Huh?
professors, what they're doing, you know?
Yeah,
it's
what
true.
their creative practices, so
Yeah,
that
it's
you
true.
can have a dialogue.
Yeah.
I do believe in that.
Do
Yeah.
you think it would? Okay.
But I'm more in the sense of I just want them to know that I am busy doing. I don't like they
yeah.
don't I don't need them to know it. I just to know it specifically or to engage with
To
it.
know that
I
you're
just
doing
need them to
things.
know
Yeah.
that I am busy and I expect them to be busy too. I can't have them do anything that I won't do myself.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I think there's oftentimes the fear, I think some,
Huh.
people who teach I know, showing what they do is they're afraid that the students will think that's what they want. and their students
Yeah, that's
won't
absolutely
mimic.
very fair.
But I
Yeah.
think it's always good to clarify that, like, no, this is not why I'm showing you this. But it's possible to avoid that risk.
Yeah, it's
They're
true.
going to Google you anyway.
Yeah, they are.
It's true.
There's no
It's
way to
true.
hide anything.
It's true.
I mean, it's different if you are the expert in the world in a thing.
You are the expert in fictive architecture.
It's true.
I don't know.
Oh, that's so going in my bio. We should put that in our bios.
I don't know. I don't know. Maybe we're just curators.
Yeah. That's a really interesting point, though, that sensitive line between what you do and what your students, what you allow them to see, what you want them to see. It's a really good question.
Is there such a thing as a fictive architect?
Yeah.
You're looking at, yeah.
I think they
You're
all
looking at
are.
one right now.
I'm one. Yeah. I think all architects are fictive architects.
And I think poets
I
are.
mean, do
Yeah.
they have like life cycles? Is it a
Oh.
temporal thing? Are there states of transformation?
I think from the very beginning, the minute you draw your first floor plan in
Mhm.
crayon, you are participating in fiction. And I think that's the
Even
That's
if, yeah,
the-
even if conceptually you're not
Yeah.
buying into that idea, technically you are.
yeah. That's a really great question. I think all of them are practicing fiction. Yeah.
Should the architects realize their true selves?
Yes, I think so. I think so, absolutely. And maybe that should be, maybe that's a good reason to start presenting my work to students. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think architects need to embrace that they're just making fictions. You know, and if we are just making fictions, then to not be so afraid. There's so much fear, I think, in buildings, or making buildings because they're expensive, and you've got clients depending on you, and you've got communities that want to be happy, and so there's a lot of consensus building and stuff that needs to happen, right? I mean, it just needs to happen to have a building realized. But I think I think it'd be a great profession if every architect just said, you know what, I'm inventing things, and that's just what I'm doing. If we all just embraced the fictive part of it, you know, not completely where you're designing things that can't be built, but I think that levity would really help, especially. It would just help to have that levity.
Poetry is the exact opposite, I think,
Yeah.
in that is present, and what is often missing is attention to the physical aspects of it.
So we need a firm of half architects and half poets.
Any other questions? Yeah.
So, it sounds like you kind of stay away from going after like a certain end product from the get-go. You like
Yeah.
to kind of let it change as you create. But when you guys first decided to collaborate, was there a certain like need or goal that you met? Or was that like, you know what I mean? Was there like, oh, we really need to like have this, or like we need to create this, or was it just like, oops, we just collaborated, let's do it again?
It was not a oops, I'll tell you that. It was difficult. It was
Yeah.
hard. We really,
hard.
because we let ourselves put it together in that initially collage-like manner, exploring what it would be by just trying different fusions, right? Because we really didn't know. Like the slides that you saw cut through here, these ones, all the ones with the hands making the house. I had cut out all these paper dolls. I was like, well, we'll do something with paper dolls, which is ridiculous, except that's what he is,
He's a paper
right?
doll.
I just, for some reason, it took me a little while to figure out, like, oh, right, he's a house and a paper doll, but he's a house. It's a paper doll that's a house. You know, so this is a perfect way of just letting it kind of end up being what it needed to be. But we had none of this in mind when we started.
So this is maybe add on this. Were there any like fundamental biases that either you had about architecture or you had about poetry that got overturned in this process?
I feel like we had been leading up to this with the guest speaking in each other's classes, though the topics of the various classes that we were teaching had made it clear that we were both exploring the same problems, just from different sides of the thing. So I think that we already were curious enough and aware enough of the possibilities in each other's fields that we didn't, I mean, I've learned a lot from working with her about what architecture is and the possibilities of it, but nothing that had to be removed from my thinking to move forward.
You're building on the relationship rather than
Yeah, I think so. I think what happened was we're both in academic environments, and if you are, I recognize you from PSU, and there's a center for everything. There's like a center for sustainable grass, and a center for, vertical things, and and it's just like, Jesus Christ. So and I was so tired, and then once you have a center, then you can organize and apply for funding, and it just seems like, not to belittle centers, I think they're important institutions, but it just seemed like everything that could be measured had an institution behind it, and then these immeasurable things were sort of left floundering. So anybody who's interested in the humanities in an academic environment that's state funded is usually just kind of like, you're like wandering around trying to figure out where you belong to, because your interests overlap with like 10 different centers, and so
it's also like I can't prove this to you.
I
cannot show you this thing.
There's no spreadsheet.
But please believe me.
Yeah. So
exists.
and so we were joking, and I said, my God, if there's only, I think I would get a grant if there was a Center for Fictive Architecture or something. We were talking about this, like it would be amazing if there was such a. And we wanted to play on the Center for Architecture, which is in town, which is the AIA's hub, and they're great. There's nothing wrong with them, but we thought it'd be nice to have some alternative to that practice or that model of a center, to be a center without to sound like you have an institutional framework and yet not have an institutional framework seemed really fun. Yeah.
But you're right, you can't ever have any physical
No.
presence. It has to all be of the mind.
Yeah.
It can,
Yeah.
the internet, okay,
Yeah.
it can be in the cloud somewhere. But certainly nothing will do it.
And it has to shrink in scale and expand in scale. It has to always change. Yeah. Yeah, I do. And sometimes, yeah, absolutely.
Did you have a question?
Yeah, I don't know what my question is, but I'm trying to figure it out. But I guess I'm looking for a definition of what fictive architecture is. Like, I feel in the virtual world, people are designing in CAD and like 3D design for games and spaces that people inhabit, and the end result of it is a virtual thing that doesn't really exist. But they have dreams about being in those places, just like real places. And I feel like those things, they have drawings on paper that are fiction before they make the end result that is real, but it's virtual.
I think that anything in the virtual sense remains fictive architecture.
But they can always update it and change it, and there's no.
And because you have to use your imagination so much in order to finish the thing. So when you're in a video game and you're inside of a structure in that game, you complete it, right? Just like a poem.
But you can't change it with your thinking. It's there the way they designed it.
But I think that we fill in gaps in order to play. We make it more real so that we can inhabit that environment more realistically. Whoa, this is on wheels.
It's probably me pushing it, sorry.
But what about when it comes so realistic that the only difference is that you're not actually there, but beyond that, it's all defined?
But you aren't actually there.
I am. I'm trying to figure out. It doesn't change in my memory, it's the same. There's a place that I've been, that I know in my past, and there's a place that I've been in a virtual world, and they're no longer different in memory.
So then I guess it would have to be the physical component is what our definition is based on.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how I think about it. It isn't a thing that is built.
I agree with that, and I would add on to it. There's this great video online right now where this architect Rem Koolhaas curated the Biennale this year, the Architecture Biennale in Venice, and he used it as an opportunity partly to show what a fiction architecture is. And one of the moments in the interview with him, it's really brief, he says to the cameraman, "Come here, I want to show you something." And the cameraman follows him, and he says, "Look at this wall." And the wall is, they've occupied this old building, but because they couldn't plaster posters on the old building, they built this other structure. So it's like an old wall, and then this aluminum structure, and then this new thin drywall, and he says, "This is architecture today. It's this. It's a fiction." And it was kind of profound to me because it made me realize, yeah, it's true. Like as a discipline, we've kind of boxed ourselves into a corner where we create the wrappers around structural systems and HVAC systems. We don't do anything anymore except paint the walls. And I felt like it was both a sad thing to say, but also a really important thing to say because it was very true to me. So I think even for me right now, even built things are kind of fictions, because if you start to poke them, you realize they're kind of paper thin, and that there's an absence of reality in most things that we engage today. Most things that we touch are planned to fall apart someday. So anything that, falls apart to me is a sort of fiction.
Okay, what if it didn't even fall apart?
Yeah.
So a sturdy house, but inhabited over time by different people with different stories about that house, creates fictive architecture too. So no, I mean, we never sat down and actually wrote out a strict definition of the thing, I think because we didn't want it to be a settled thing. So I think it's more about the experience of it. So then maybe you could argue that what you're discussing for the games is real because it has a memory, but you could also argue that because of the mutability of memories of different people's experiences in an established physical dwelling, that also can be creating fictive architecture through the varied use and through alternate memory.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There is no definition. It's you know it when you, it's like,
you know it when you see it.
You know it when you see it.
But
I won't
I
do
think the
that,
idea
sorry.
of subjectivity, I mean, that idea of memory and spaces and our subjective experiences of spaces and how we recall them in our memories or how we relate to environments, I think we're really both interested in that, the intimacy of your subjective interpretation or experience of a space. And that's something that in my discipline nobody will touch right now, is subjectivity. There was this whole movement called phenomenology that basically made talking about how you experience a space impossible anymore. So there's a lot of quantification that happens in my discipline. Like most of my colleagues have spreadsheets that can tell you how much light is falling on a desk. But to me, I just can't do anything with that, and I don't know why. Not that that's not valuable information, I just can't process it, and I don't know what to do with that stuff personally. So I'm interested in the subjective right now.
To help me understand the fictive architecture, tell me what fictive music would be.
Oh.
Could you have fictive music with no instruments?
John Cage? Yeah. I mean, no
woodwinds, no brass.
I do.
No guitar.
Yeah, my favorite, I mean, what John Cage used to say his favorite music was listening to what was happening on the street, right? That was music to him, and and he felt that music that he was listening to on the radio was just making sound. So I think, I don't know where fiction comes in on that. I feel like that's a really good question, though.
Because architecture without substance is kind of like
musicians without
music without
musicians.
No trumpet.
I'm okay with
like
that.
Thelonious Monk with no instrument. Where does that live?
Well,
Is
so
there on websites? How do you even know?
Sheet music,
That's
right?
a great
By what some of the
sure.
examples we're giving, it could also just be like the music
script.
sitting there on the piano unplayed is fictive. Yeah,
That's a really good question.
It is.
That's a great analogy. Like comparing the two. Yeah, Audrey.
The way that I think about it, fictive is that it's not necessarily that the absence of materiality doesn't matter, or the presence of materiality doesn't matter. It's that the architecture is a speech act.
Yeah.
It is a text, and so in a certain sense, the creation of it is a space that speaks itself, that tells itself as an individual, that has agency. So prescriptive in a sense, and I think that's where you can kind of escape the materiality, non-materiality.
Yeah.
Complexity?
I think we need a website, and I think you should write an essay on that for the website. That was beautiful. That's really well said. Do you have a question? Yeah.
To me, it's an exploration, I guess, because normally architect, a designer, their day-to-day, they have a client.
Yeah.
Constraints.
And deadlines.
And, right, and
Yeah.
so this is taking away that, which you guys both
Yeah.
said, you don't have a clear goal, you don't have like
Right.
anyone to please other than yourself.
Yeah.
So is that maybe your fear in talking to your students? Is that
Maybe,
you're
partly,
gonna
yeah.
kind of show them this like more artistic, explorative
Yeah,
side?
and they'll become so free that they'll just stop coming to class.
Right.
Like, it's not part of my
Yeah.
practice
I mean,
anymore.
You need that, like, you need this balance of,
Yeah.
like, understanding and
Yeah.
constrained process, but also very constrained process.
But I don't know why you can't, I don't know why they can't be
They
merged
could be
more.
merged. They could be merged.
I think they
I'm just a
should be.
chicken. I think I'm just a total chicken.
I think there's room for
Yeah.
these kind of ideas, even in things that must be built
Mm-hmm.
and, to code.
Yeah.
Just like if you're writing something instructional using words, there's no reason that there can't be interesting use of sound or other poetic components embedded in it. Why can't you delight the ear while still giving information to somebody?
Yeah.
Well, we have something for
Yes,
you
we
guys
do.
if you're interested.
What's that?
Certificates.
No. An exercise in 2-minute architecture. You can build your own house. Pass those around. There are instructions for use. That should be enough.
Yeah.
I have a few more if not. So our little house is named Charlie, though I couldn't tell you why. We just both knew.
We just knew when we saw
His
him.
name was
We picked
Charlie.
Charlie.
But you'll have to name your own house.
Yes. So you'll be a fictive architect too.
Yes. All right.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having
Thank
us.
you.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks so much.
Awesome.
All right, thanks everybody for coming. We return on September 9th with Philip Graham of Ear Trumpet Labs with his talk, Building Great Microphones from the Stuff in Your Basement. Philip Graham is the proprietor, bricklayer, of Ear Trumpet Labs, a Portland company hand-building distinctive microphones. He left his software job to make mics full-time 3 years ago and has rarely left his basement since, except to see the musicians he's inspired by. And when he's lucky, they're using his mics. Having stumbled into the rabbit hole of microphone building, Philip will attempt to drag in after him as many listeners as he can. There will be some tech talk about the many ways of transducing sound waves to electrical signals, the ins and outs of a weird DIY niche community, making cool, useful things from metal with no machining skills at all, the path from hobby to obsession to business, and the pleasures of the tool maker in seeing their tools well used. Should be really great. Let's have another round of applause for Coleman.
Thanks so much.